I will be the first person to tell you that I don't know much about the Seiko brand. I know the cliff notes, a few basic details, but as far as the brand in general, I'm useless. There are many of you who are probably watching this that know way more about this brand than I do. But since it's a new year, January, as this video is being recorded, the thinking was it's time to mix up the formula a bit. So I bought myself my first Seiko, the reference SPB143. And I want this to be more of a personal discussion around why I chose this watch, why it spoke to me, and why I think this could also speak to you in this category as it did me. In the second part of the series, it'll be a lot more structured around the design development and how it has been incrementally improved to appease to the masses while also addressing many elements that the Seiko enthusiast wanted. Off the bat, I will tell you that I was influenced by watch review videos when it came to finally pulling the trigger on this piece. James Stacey did an excellent coverage of this watch, I think last year, if I'm not mistaken. The video that actually sold me on this watch, however, was done by Watch On, and I'll be linking the video in the corner of the screen, where he compared this watch to a Tudor Black Bay 58. I just felt like this watch had its own identity. It didn't shout about its presence or how it looked necessarily, but it felt like a Seiko. Focusing in on this piece, what has it done so well? Why did it resonate with me? To begin, it's good to look at the Seiko dive watch identity, the Seiko brand in itself. When you buy a Seiko watch, you are becoming a part of a club. You're understanding its identity. It has its own design language that is very true to its brand. The problem is, when we look at their design identity as a whole, they can be very unified in many areas, like when we look at their cases, their crown guard integration, their dial designs, but then they can also deviate wildly in different directions. And I'm speaking for myself when I say that often I struggle with honing in on one watch and appreciating it for all of its factors. But I've never been sold on one entirely because there's always an element to it that stands out, where the handset might be a bit strange, or the dial might be a bit peculiar, or the case shape is out of proportion. Something about it just doesn't sit right with you when you're looking at the watch as a whole. That's what's made me struggle when buying a Seiko watch. And believe me, I've been looking for a very long time to pick up one. I have been very fortunate to get some hands-on experience with models like the SKX and the Turtle, and these models have just never spoken to me because of their overly stylized case designs. You know what I mean. In order to understand this new recreation, we have to step back a few years to when we saw the reproduction of the SLA017 and the 6105, the two Prospex models, very much paying tribute to the first dive watches that Seiko ever made. The SLA017, as most of us probably know, was the modern tribute to the original 62 MAS, a watch that largely took its inspirations from the original Blancpain bathyscaphe. Technically speaking, the original 62 MAS is not a truly original design from the Seiko brand itself, but it's what set them going, it's what set them in motion. Soon after that, we saw the 6105, or the Captain Willard, that it's very well known for, with the turtle case, with the offset crown, and from there, we've seen the dive watch identity just evolve ever since. We have the offset crown at the fore, the cushion case. All of those aspects have now been translated through to the entire Seiko line, whether we're looking at the Marine Master, the SKX, the Turtle, the Sumo, Samurai, all of those models in the category. The issue was, though the SLA017 was an excellent recreation and did many things that Seiko owners wanted, it was extremely expensive and in very limited supply. They only made a couple thousand of them, if I'm not mistaken. And the Seiko fanatics were very upset by this because the watch is gorgeous. It's a stunning recreation. It addressed so many things that the owners wanted to see, but they would just never get their hands on the watch. A year or so later, Seiko introduced the SPB143 and a couple of other models in this line. Very much the modern step up from the SLA017, making a more egalitarian, approachable model in this category that anyone can get their hands on. From a business standpoint, it is exactly what they should have done, and the results speak for themselves. These watches have become very popular in a short amount of time. So the reason why I jumped onto this watch, I'm sure most of you can probably understand now, it is because it eliminates all of the unnecessary. It does away with many organic forms in favor of a more rigid approach. The dial does away with circular plots and instead adopts rectangular trapezoid batons. The handset is gorgeously simple but well addressed. The case form, true to the skin diver format of the 1960s, is correct. The watch's size is appropriate. It's not oversized. It's very well fitting. The thickness of the watch, just the same. The bracelet, when you compare its width next to the case, feels very appropriate. So let's discuss the realms of Prospex, or professional specification. I've always been very interested by this line and what it represents and how Seiko conducts this region. They seem to be assigning more and more watches under the Prospex line, like the new Alpinist we've seen recently. But there is something to admire about how they address it. I love the logo and the identity. I think it works very well with this watch. Some would probably disagree. But it's just thinking that you're now going into a category that is not your entry level in the Seiko dive watch space. We can call it something like transitional mid-tier, where you're now getting a watch that has a more quality build, that seems like many more parts have been considered and thought through. There are lots of aspects to this watch that feels like more care has been put into them. Just for example, you now have a sapphire crystal on this model with an anti-reflective coating that I've never seen so clear before. You have a bracelet and clasp that feels solid. The actual swing arm is fully milled. Touches like the bezel action is more refined. The crown is better seated. As far as my watch goes, there's no quality control issues. And buying myself into the Seiko brand, I didn't know what to expect. But I am more than pleasantly surprised getting into this category, if that makes any sense. You feel like you're getting a watch that has been scrutinized instead of mass-produced. As far as the wearing experience goes, I'll tell you that the grey dial is what makes this watch all the more unique and fun to wear. The honest truth, if this piece did not have a grey dial, I probably would give it a miss. Very interesting that the slate grey of this dial matches the color of the steel, which is slightly darker than usual. In fact, it looks more like titanium, and that's to do with the Dia Shield scratch-resistant coating they put on it. And over my time wearing this watch, I've just been sucked into those details, like the half brushing, half polishing on the handset, the rectangular elements that work their way around the entire dial and speak so well together. The bezel, though it is not an aluminium bezel, but a painted steel bezel if I'm not mistaken, it has one of the best typefaces I have ever seen on a bezel. The fully graduated markers around the bezel also tie that in nicely. And for those of you out there who know this page pretty well and know my loves and my loathes, I am someone generally who really doesn't appreciate dates on dive watches. But in this case, with this example, I can see it and it doesn't bother me in the slightest. Maybe it has to do with its congruence next to the batons around the dial. Maybe it's just because it's so linked to Seiko's design identity that it just feels correct on this model. I believe that in many ways it's Seiko's attempt at attacking models like the Tudor Black Bay, where it's a watch that pays tribute to its past references, highlights many aspects that made it famous, but modernizing it at the same time, making it accessible. The end result is a watch that looks fairly sterile, fairly plain, but in many ways I believe it's a model that speaks to the more reserved dive watch enthusiast, one that prefers a piece that is not overly adventurous, but one that still captures its brand identity. And it's at this meeting point where I think this watch intersects so beautifully. As you can probably tell, the thoughts are still percolating. So over the next few weeks, I will discuss this watch in more detail, focus in on the wearing experience a bit more, and looking at its design in greater detail. I'm sure you can find many more videos out there that discuss the watch's general specifications and other aspects. So as someone who is completely new to the Seiko brand, I can say that I am very happy that this was my first choice in this genre. I will say that it has left me surprised and also hasn't left me wanting more, like it needs to be improved in any way, really. It's a fun watch, built for purpose, built for utility, still remains true to its design language, but is not overly expressive. And it's one of the new releases that has not only grabbed my attention, but has kept my attention ever since. And these pieces have just never spoken to me fully because of their ovary. And these pieces have just never spoken to me fully because of their overly...